Some of you are familiar with Drawabox and the lessons that I post there, and some of you are new. We've got a lot of different video content for lessons 3 to 7, and right now I'm going to kind of revisit some of the basics in lessons 1 and 2 and try and convey a lot of the instructions and concepts in video form. Most of the lessons are very detailed and written out as text articles, and that's worked okay for the past while, but I understand that it does make it harder to kind of pinpoint exactly what I mean in certain cases, and so I'll try and pad things out. The text is still important, same with all the diagrams and everything, but this will hopefully just serve to be an extra addition to that. So for those of you who are new to Drawabox, it's a website where I post 7 lessons and a few individual optional challenges, well, somewhat optional. I try and teach a very limited set of concepts. I want to teach first the use of your body and specifically your arm. A lot of beginners don't understand the difference between drawing from your shoulder, drawing from your elbow, or drawing from your wrist, and in what circumstances one would use the different pivots. Also, moving on from that, I want to teach how to convey the illusion of something being solid and three-dimensional. We tend to think primarily in the dimensions of our flat, two-dimensional piece of paper, and as a result, our drawings tend to come out equally flat. And instead, I want to teach people how to think in 3 dimensions, treat the piece of paper like it's a window opening out onto a larger, infinite 3-dimensional world. From there, I want to take the skills that we've developed in constructing individual, simple, solid 3D forms and bring that into combining them to create more complicated objects so that you can look at a complicated construction, break it down into its simplest components, rebuild those simple components as they need to be arranged, and then build it back up in your drawing. And that's basically the principles that we look into when it comes to drawing literally any object there is. I don't cover figure drawing. I did try that at one point, but frankly, I'm not very good at teaching that material. So it's not really in my plans to cover that anytime soon. So when I do eventually expand into different lessons, it's going to be more in terms of design and form language and that kind of advanced topics rather than delving into figure drawing. There are other people who teach figure drawing far better than I do. So I'm going to focus on what I know best and what I know how to teach best. So let's get started on a few simple concepts about Drawabox. Firstly, what do we cover? I kind of just mentioned that. We cover the basics of the mechanics of using your arm, learning to convey form, and then the idea of construction. There are a few specifics that I want to break down before we move into anything else. What does it mean to use one's arm in different ways? So I'm going to draw a simple little block out of an arm here. And I'm going to use this to explain how there are 3 different pivots on the arm. We have the wrist, the elbow, and the shoulder. And we can pivot from each of these. The wrist has a very limited range of motion, maybe around here. The elbow's got more range. And the shoulder has all the range you could want. So the reason this is important is because we grew up writing a lot. Don't really care who you are or where you're from. you probably went to school and learned how to write. And even if you didn't, it's still quite likely that you are very used to trying to draw and write from your wrist. And that's because your wrist gives you a very tight center of control. It's got limited range of movement, but if you need to turn a line on a dime, you can certainly do that. Your shoulder, however, has a massive range of motion. But what it excels at is drawing long lines that flow smoothly. And the reason that that's really useful is because the vast majority of the lines that we want to draw need to kind of maintain a consistent trajectory. If we're drawing from the wrist, if I try and draw a long line from my wrist, I'm going to end up running out of my the range of the wrist, like somewhere around here, and then I'm going to start trying to move my hand along this way in an awkward kind of compensating dance, which ends up with a lot of shitty little wobbles. And it just does not come out well. So no form that you draw like this is really going to have that kind of crisp, strong, smooth edge that you need to really convey the sense of solidity that we're after. Now, drawing from your shoulder can result in a considerably straighter line. See that? That's from my shoulder. It's much smoother and much more consistent throughout the length. And you can use that to convey the kind of solidity that we're going to be looking for later on. Your elbow kind of cuts in the middle. It's got less range than the shoulder, more than the wrist, but more control than the shoulder and less than the wrist. But the reason that I don't want you to worry too much about the elbow right now is that when you deal in the middle ground, you're not going to really train yourself to properly work from all of your pivots. If you know how to draw from the shoulder, drawing from the elbow is extremely easy. It's intuitive. It comes free with the package. But drawing from your elbow, you're still going to have difficulty drawing from the shoulder. And moreover, while we practice drawing this way, we get lazy, we get tired, we get distracted. So we automatically end up working our way down without realizing it back to drawing from the wrist. And then eventually we realize, oh wait, I'm drawing from the wrist. I need to be drawing from the shoulder, and we kind of go back up and start the cycle over. If you're drawing from your elbow only, you're going to end up going back to your wrist much faster. Furthermore, some people will say, well, can I blend drawing from my shoulder and my elbow? I don't recommend that either, because when you are drawing from multiple pivots, you end up in a situation where you're kind of muddying the motion. You don't have one clear point from which you are moving your arm, and so you cannot easily keep track of whether or not you're drawing from the shoulder. It becomes much more difficult to just be on top of that and catch yourself when you're making a mistake of going back to your wrist. So some people will say, well, I don't really understand how to draw from my shoulder. And for that, I recommend a simple exercise, which was similar to what I actually demonstrated before, where you hold out your arm, kind of bend your elbow at a sort of 90-degree angle, and you pivot from the different points. So first you pivot from your wrist, and you do that kind of getting used to what the motion feels like, and then you lock that joint. Locking it means that the exact action that you just performed, you do not allow yourself to do it anymore. You don't allow yourself to pivot from that joint. It is locked. And next, you pivot from your elbow. And you do the same thing. You get used to what the motion feels like. You get a sense for the full range of motion. And you repeat it as much as you need to do to remind yourself of what that feels like. And finally, you lock that joint as well. And remember, locking a joint just means no longer being able to change its angle. So in this case, the elbow is locked at a 90-degree angle. You can lock it at a 180-degree angle, fully outstretched, or whatever else. But generally, when I'm drawing, I keep it close to a 90-degree angle. It's not like a specific measurement that you need to maintain. It's just kind of halfway bent. And so finally, you lock all those other joints and you pivot from the shoulder, and you get a feeling for what that feels like. Now, I don't want you to stress too much about these joints being locked. You might get a little bit of, just a tiny bit of extra motion from your elbow while you're drawing from the shoulder. That's fine. Just don't, make sure that you're thinking about keeping it locked, but no more than that. It shouldn't take up too much of your kind of mental capacity. You don't want to distract yourself from other important things. Just make sure that, okay, am I drawing from my shoulder? Yes. Okay, keep moving. One thing that I am worried about in saying this is that when people hear me say, well, if you can move a little bit from your elbow, then they're going to take that and run with it, and then they're going to end up drawing from their elbows, because students always do that. You give them an inch and they'll take a mile. But all I'm saying is make sure that you're just thinking about in the back of your head, are my joints locked? Am I pivoting from more than one point? If I am, don't do that. Am I pivoting from my shoulder when I need to? Good. Lastly, people will ask me, well, I want to draw a small line. Is it okay to do that with my wrist? Because the wrist has a small range. Now that's a tricky question. And you have to ask yourself not about how long the line is going to be, but what that line requires from you. Does that line need to be something stiff that can turn and twist very easily? Or does it need to be something that flows smoothly? You'll find that the majority of the lines that you're drawing, straight lines, curves, ellipses, all the stuff that we cover in the first 2 lessons, or most of it, needs to be drawn from the shoulder because it needs to flow smoothly. Some people will say, like, if they're doing this stuff digitally, which I do not recommend the first time you're going through these lessons, you should be doing it in ink. That's a pretty big point that I raise on the website. But if you're going back over it and you're, say, using a small tablet, just because the tablet is small does not mean that you're restricted to drawing from your wrist or your elbow. You can still make the motion from your shoulder. It's just going to feel weird at first. We are not used to drawing from our shoulders when we start out. We have done all our practicing and use of a pen or a pencil from our wrists because that's how we write. The muscles involved in moving your arm from the shoulder that way are underdeveloped, so it is going to get sore. Your endurance won't be that great at first. Eventually, it'll become second nature. Now, if while you're doing this you start to feel sharp pains, that suggests that you're not doing it correctly and you kind of need to review that exercise that I just demonstrated. So moving along from there, I will get into the matters of form and construction later on in more specific videos. But the next thing that I want to talk about is how do you use the lessons? A lot of books that people have they'll talk about concepts and they won't really show you how to apply them properly in a way that lets you learn them. Drawabox is different. In each lesson, we have a whole bunch of homework, which I can actually show you right now. Where's my internet browser? So if you go over to drawabox.com, crap, let's go away. There we go. Here's the website. And the lessons are available through the Learn tab, Lesson 1. And obviously it's still very text heavy, but we've got these sections, homework, one for each part, and it's got very specific exercises and page counts that I want you to complete. 2 filled pages of the superimposing lines exercises, 2 filled pages of the ghosting lines exercises, and so on. And so you at least have a sort of target. Now the point here is not to aim to be able to do each exercise perfectly. They seem simple, but you're actually going to find that they're quite difficult. We are not aiming to master any of this right now because that's going to take an eternity. Instead, we want to get a sense that we understand what we need to be aiming for. And the reason that I have this specific amount of pages here is because this is not necessarily enough for you to be able to do anything considerable with them, but it is enough of a body of work that you can show other people who know what they're talking about and have them tell you, well, okay, this is what you're doing wrong, you're doing this okay, generally you're doing fine, just keep an eye on these things and move forwards. And Drawabox is great because it's not just a website. It's not just a bunch of lessons. You're not just interacting with a static page and shouting into the void. You have access to the subreddit, which is where all of this actually began, where people post their work for critique. And you also have access to the Discord server, which I'll include links to the subreddit and the Discord server on the video description. But basically, you can go to any of these two places and have your work reviewed. The subreddit is generally better for having a full block of work, meaning the entire lesson's worth, and getting good detailed breakdowns on what you need to work on and where you're doing fine. The Discord is better for more immediate responses to say you have a particular problem and you want to get an answer to that. The Discord server is great. There's a channel for every single lesson, and you can also join us in just talking about whatever. We've got general channels too. So the point of the matter there is that I don't want you to work in a vacuum. You, at this point, if you're a beginner, and even if you're not a beginner, if you're intermediate and you're new to these concepts and these lessons anyways, chances are you probably don't know as much as you might think you do. And if you think you know nothing, you're on the right track. So the point is that it's really important to go out there and to talk to other people and to get other people's eyes on your work. Not everyone is going to have useful advice for you. Not everyone is going to tell you the right things, but it's still going to be worthwhile overall. And that's actually why I'm making these videos. I want people to be able to reference more concrete examples, more concrete things where I've said certain things that you might have missed or might have forgotten, so they work as helpful reminders when someone else is critiquing your work. So lastly, say you completed that work and you demonstrated that you were on the right track. You would be good to then move on to the next lesson, but that raises the question, well, you didn't master the exercises, you're still not doing them perfectly, or maybe not even near perfectly. What do you do then? Well, the lessons that I introduce in lessons 1 and 2 are not meant to just be done now and then forgotten about. Once you complete the lessons, I want you to start incorporating them into a regular warm-up routine. And this is not going to consist of an entire follow-through of all the exercises in the quantity that they were recommended in the lesson, because that's far too much. It's like 8, 10, 12, 15 hours of work, depending on who you are. But what I do want you to do is, at the beginning of every session of drawing, I want you to set aside 10 to 15 minutes, and I want you to pick 2 to 3 exercises from your pool. So let's say you've completed 1. The pool of exercises consists of all the exercises in lesson 1. If you've completed lesson 2 as well, you're going to add those exercises to it. And I want you to kind of change them up. Some of the exercises kind of repeat the same concepts, but other ones will introduce different things, and you don't want to end up too focused on any one thing. I don't want you to sit there and just do a bunch of ellipse-based things forever. I want you to also be practicing your lines. That one was terrible. And your boxes and so on, and organic forms and form intersections and all that good stuff. So remember, when you're done the lesson, you are not done with the exercises. This is kind of building up a routine so you gradually learn how to develop these skills. I am not technically teaching you how to draw, I'm teaching you how to learn how to draw. The journey of learning to draw is a very long and drawn out thing. This is just the beginning point. And if you think that you're going to be able to figure out how to draw your favorite, characters and make lots of money on Patreon or whatever in like a matter of months, it's not going to be the case. It's a long journey, and this is just the beginning. So I'm going to call this video quits. I actually tried to record this previously and ended up talking way too much and going on way too long. Hopefully this one was more succinct. I'm going to get started now on making videos for these specific exercises. So hopefully you'll start on that next.